So that profile of him is interesting. The big question that I see with a lot of this is, was this man one strange, sick man, or was he part of a bigger group of dangerous people? So as far as this strange, sick man theory, what is your profile of him? How does he look?
Well, the sick man, I mean, that's quite a loaded term, right? But what I can tell you from our early investigation into his background, and, some of this is known and some of this I sort of extrapolated from what I learned about him when I worked on that documentary. We're talking about someone who came from pretty humble beginnings, working class background. And he was always very bright, obviously. And even though his family was more working class, he was able to get into some exclusive schools when he was younger. But what was interesting when I worked on the documentary as a private investigator, went out and found all these people who knew him before he became wealthy, and met his parents and talked to his parents and said they were nice, sort of lovely, regular, middle-class people. But there's always questions about how much of a relationship did he have. And one of the things that really came through was a lot of people talked about how they knew Epstein, but they didn't really know him. So a lot of his relationships, from what we gathered and the research that we did, they were, sort of superficial. He was very much interested in intellectual banter, and in fact would hire intellectuals and academics to basically hang out with him to discuss things. And also he sort of had this model where he would bring in an academic or an intellectual, they'd have dinner, they'd socialize, and then he would write them a check for their research. And that's how he got to know a lot of those people. And then he would connect some of these people. He also liked to throw out names from what we understand. One of the academics that he talked with a lot and had dinner at his home in New York, he basically said, "Hey, do you like Bill Clinton? You want to meet him?" And then they kind of got together, three of them. So he did a lot of that, a lot of networking that way. So it was interesting because I was looking through my notes in my Epstein file.
That's right. There it is.
From what I worked, I better lock that up, right? From my Epstein file was that I wrote a lot in a lot of the notes along the side. I wrote, it looks like he's collecting people.
Mm.
And I thought that was interesting. None of that came out in the documentary because we moved away from this kind of psychological profile, but he was collecting like these academics and intellectuals and people in the financial world and politicians. So that was very interesting when you see a person who collects people. And that moves into, I'm not saying he had a personality disorder, but most of us don't do that. And that was one thing I had written a lot in the margins as a big question mark. Does he collect people?
Yeah, and I'll just add too, we've talked before, I've been around a very dangerous personality disordered psychopathic type, and he would literally describe how he was collecting people.
Yeah, personality disorders will do that.
He had a social system where he was bringing people in, filtering for who was going to be compliant. He would test people's boundaries and things. And then sometimes when the party was over or whatever, he would say, "Oh, we got a lawyer," something like that. He would be kind of announcing aloud to himself and to others what type of skill set of the person he had collected into his little group had. And that was the way that he saw the world. He saw people around him as a collection to be used as tools.
Yeah, that's exactly right. A lot of personality disorders will do that, particularly the antisocials and the narcissistic personality disorder. They collect people to fit in with their pathologies.
Mm-hmm.
And, was some of that going on with Epstein? Were these more sort of business opportunities? Was it both, right?
Well, what do you think?
I think, my opinion, I think things changed with him because what I saw is early collecting because this helped to fund his business and he became very successful. And then just what I know about sort of the early on beginning of sexual predating, that I think sort of changed over time because one thing that we learned is that early on, he didn't share these girls that he was preying on. And then there becomes questions about he shared some, he didn't share others. But I think the sex trafficking and the predator behaviors, I argue, served more of a broad business interest at first. But then I questioned if he was getting some type of reward out of this, which was beyond the money.
To go even deeper on these ideas, you can watch my full episode using the link in the description or the box on the screen.